All right, so welcome to the Blue Swan. I'm your host, John Connor, and today we have Martin Percy, who is a BAFTA, Emmy, and 11 times Webby Award winner, specializing in interactive video. And so please tell us whatever you'd like.
Okay, what shall I just introduce myself? Is that the idea?
Yeah, introduce yourself, your work, and everything else.
Cool. Okay. So, hi, my name's Martin Percy. I make videos with interactivity in the video, usually to try to empower people to do something or to educate them how to do something. Why would anyone want to put interactivity in a video? Everyone knows that interactive films suck. And it is true that indeed many interactive films suck. So why do I want to kind of persist doing that? If you're going to make an interactive film, there are three reasons you might have for doing it. One is to educate people and empower them. Another is to entertain them, and another is to kind of for e-commerce or something like that. So most of the kind of ghastly failed attempts at doing interactive video have been entertainment based, trying to entertain people better by adding interactivity to video. The problem with this is that linear video entertains people very well already. So usually there's no point in adding interactivity, and quite a lot of these kind of entertainment based interactive films, one just thinks, well, why do they bother? Wouldn't just a nice normal film be easier? And since it's so much more straightforward to make and distribute a linear film, that is indeed the case. So for entertainment, it's very difficult to justify. For e-commerce, it amazes me that sites like Facebook and apps like TikTok and so on don't allow proper interactive advertising, because I think they could sell a ton more stuff if they did, rather than just these kind of dumb sort of buttons. But what I focus on, which is trying to educate people or empower them to do things that they don't know how to do. Otherwise, adding interactivity to video is incredibly powerful medium, and there are 3 peer-reviewed medical research papers done on my work about my films which train people how to do CPR using interactive video, and they found that the results are extremely persuasive. You know, that with an interactive video, we can train people as effectively as a vastly more expensive face-to-face training session with, a real teacher and, a classroom and plastic dummies and all that malarkey. We can train people just as well with an interactive video, and then you can reach kind of millions of people at virtually no cost. The research data is quite convincing, and so my approach to training using interactive video, we started in the UK, now it's moved to Canada. Films that I made for CPR training are kind of rolling out across all the schools in Canada at the moment, and we're just starting something in the US called Cardiac Star, which should be released soon. So, yeah, so that's training. And then you might say, well, what if you're not interested in training? So there's another form of interactive film I've been doing a lot recently, which is what you might call interactive political documentaries. So obviously, lots of people have seen traditional political documentaries, for example, like Bowling for Columbine or other sort of great work by Michael Moore. And that's all fine. But of course, the only views that get shared with that sort of documentary are the views of the filmmaker. The audience just sits there, dumb, silent, passive, absorbing the filmmaker's wisdom without any opportunity to talk back or express what they think. This always struck me as incredibly undemocratic. And so, what I wanted to do was to make a political documentary which reflected the views of the audience. I first got a chance to do this back in 2020 for University of the Arts London, and I collaborated with them to make a film called Climate Emergency Interactive, which is like, and then since then, more recently, I've done a piece called AI Basics, Thrills or Chills, which we're still running. And so to just describe AI Basics, Thrills or Chills, that's like a 2-hour session. So it's a feature length session. But in that 2-hour session, we have 4 12-minute films. The audience shouts out their views during the film. So it might be a question like, how important do you think the AI revolution is? As important as the internet, the industrial revolution, or the evolution of humans? And then the audience shouts out depending on what they think. And so that's a way for people to express themselves at a very basic level during the film. And then each of the 4 short films leads to a discussion period where people can talk more freely. So this is a form of political documentary where it absolutely reflects what that specific audience thinks in each session. And anyone who comes will make about 15 conscious decisions about AI and the politics and ethics of AI and be part of about 70 minutes of discussion. So that's what I think a political documentary should be, not just the filmmaker broadcasting their views to a silent, passive audience, but the filmmaker creating an environment where we create like a conversation starter where the audience is able to express their views, firstly in sort of compressed form during the films, and then more openly during the discussion periods, which I think is a far more democratic and inclusive way of running a political documentary. So again, with a film like AI Basics, Thrills or Chills, it's never happened that anyone's come out at the end and said, I don't see what the point of the interactivity is. Why don't you just make a linear film instead? And same with my CPR training films. No one has ever said, oh, why don't you just make a linear film? That would be better. And so that's why I put interactivity into films and hope to continue doing so. But you might say, well, but it's so rare. It's such unusual user behavior to interact with a film. There are hardly any interactive films out there. I would beg to differ. I think an app like TikTok or Instagram is showing a fundamental user behavior about video in the age of the internet, where the user is watching for a bit, then interacting, then watching, then interacting, then watching, then interacting. For me, that's natural behavior in the age of the internet. The tragedy with all of those social media apps is there's only one question, which is, are you interested in what you're watching? And all that does is opening the floodgates to an ongoing deluge of more or less random social media kind of content, much of which is slop, human made or AI generated. But users on TikTok and Instagram are displaying natural user behavior. What I'm trying to do with my interactive films is to harness that in a way which actually teaches them something, or empowers them to do something, or enlightens them about something like AI, rather than just kind of feeding them social media. So anyway, that's an extremely long, wordy introduction. Yes, I hope that gives you something to have a think about.
Thanks. And so I think it's important that you mentioned both social media interactivity and then sort of AI as a pending industrial revolution. Back in 2019, the neural networks are essentially the pipelines that the oil runs through. And so within the realm of interactive video, some of the computational and probabilistic logic from game and choice theory plays into both the video design and the interactivity. And so if you don't mind, would you be willing to sort of touch on some of the logic and the design choices you made behind differing genres in interactive video? And that could be, animal selection in Vuri, or it could be how you design emotional appeal and interactive workflows in some of the videos for CPR training, cardiac arrest, or sort of sensitivity training and crisis management for Uber?
Sure. So I think the challenge is that all of my projects are kind of micro budget productions. They all tend to be very siloed, very isolated. There is no giant social media aggregator behind my interactive videos, which is kind of rapaciously grabbing the data and using it in some sort of way. They are all basically just kind of standalone productions. Jack Ma would be terribly bored because obviously what someone like Jack Ma is looking for, or any of the social media giants, is they're looking for kind of gigantic scale interactions, and they're trying to build a social graph, what people are interested in, what the relationships are between the people, da da da, all that stuff, as you know. So with my stuff, it's all much more small scale, and it's much more based on trying to create a forms of interaction which are dramatically successful and emotionally engaging. And the fundamental way I come up with interactions is thinking like this. So lots of filmmakers think, oh, well, I'm trying to tell a story, right? But then there's a problem if you're making interactive films, which is over history, the vast majority of stories are not interactive. Going back to sort of the campfire and sitting around the campfire, the storyteller didn't ask you what Aladdin or Beowulf did next. The storyteller told you what Aladdin or Beowulf did next, even when it was just verbal at a stage when making it interactive would have been, trivially easy. And that's something about the nature of story. Okay, so how do you make an interactive film? When I make my films, I don't think of them as stories. I think of them as a model of real life, because stories are not interactive, but real life is always interactive. Very, for example, Very is an interactive set of interactive films that I made with Fountain Digital Labs, which is trying to give children and to some extent adults the fairy tale sense that they are interacting with real animals. And so we filmed footage with real animals in a zoo, huge zoo in the UAE, and on location in Kenya, as well as a couple of other places. But so, okay, how do you design an emotionally satisfying interaction with a real animal, bearing in mind that, for the sake of argument, you're going with my thing of you're trying to make it like a model of real life. In real life, what does an animal want from you as a human? Food. We designed a form of interaction where you had the fairy tale sense that you were giving the animal food. We set up the camera. We would literally drop a piece of physical meat in front of the camera, and then we would go away for 2 hours, having set it up in the vicinity of lions. And then we would come back 2 hours later, and we picked up this footage of a lion. So what we did in the edit was put that together. So the interaction, in this case, this was with PlayStation VR. The interaction was shake your controller in PlayStation VR. That would make the meat drop down, clunk, in video. This is not an effect. It was a real piece of meat. And then a little while later, a lion would come in, sniff the meat that you had presented to the lion. And then, in fact, in that case, the lion wasn't interested in the meat, so it bit the camera, discovered that the camera was not edible, and then went away. The logic of the question there was to create a model of real life, and the interaction was satisfying because it felt like something you would do in real life. Similarly, with all these CPR films, we build a model of a real life cardiac arrest emergency, and we know the right thing that you should be doing at each stage. And so we give you the choice between a wrong thing to do and a right thing to do. To make it dramatic, we make the wrong thing as close as possible to the right thing, so it's difficult. And especially, what we love is places where it's counterintuitive, because some stages of CPR are not what you would expect, and that's where we give you a wrong answer, which seems much more likely to be true than the actual right answer. So what we're doing there is we're doing that to build up choices which are dramatic and exciting and sort of feel right, as opposed to sort of the classic terrible, turn left, turn right choice you would get in a bad interactive film or in a bad choose your own adventure book. All the choices feel kind of motivated because it's all real. It's all part of what that situation would be like in real life. Now, but the problem is is this building a vast network of data that we could sell to people because, as you say, data is the oil of the 21st century? Tragically, not. This sort of data is not particularly useful to anyone, but it's interesting and it's fun and it makes the film go well. But it's not really particularly profitable or useful for kind of to sell to third parties. Now, on a bigger scale, probably the most famous interactive film of recent years is a film called Bandersnatch from Netflix as part of the Black Mirror series. And there were sort of urban fairy tales that the choices in Bandersnatch were somehow being sold to vast corporate entities so that they could profit off it. I think that was all just a fairy tale. I don't think there was really anything in it. Yeah. So I hope that answers your question. But yeah, so I don't think at the moment there is any use of data from interactive choices that you can profit with. However, just to do one thing in terms of what might happen in the future, as I mentioned to start with, I don't understand why the big social media companies don't make it possible to do proper interaction around advertisements. If you take a platform like TikTok or Instagram, you've got a bunch of ads there, and obviously you've got all these marketing people agonizing over how can we get our response rate, 0.5% higher from this ad on Instagram. Well, I tell you right now how you can make your response rate 50% higher, not 0.5%. You can create choices which are emotionally satisfying within the video. The moment all the ads on Instagram, you've got a linear video or a static image, and at the bottom, you've got the most boring possible button, which is just like a more info button that you hit to jump to a web page where you actually interact and maybe buy something. I do not understand why. Imagine you have, attractive person X looks you in the eye, asks you a question, holds up, product A and product B, which do you like the look of more? I reckon, even such a crashingly simple and crude ad like that, I think you would get a vast increase in response. Also, then you would have a whole new type of data, which out of product A or product B, which did people on Instagram like more? If you've got 100,000 people responding, then that becomes a whole new form of data. Somehow, Instagram and the others have just never gone there. Meta burned, what was it, $70 billion, $90 billion innovating fruitlessly with VR, but they've never even spent, as far as I can see, they haven't spent 1 cent innovating around new ways to respond to ads on a platform like Instagram, which could generate lots of data. So nothing much happening with interactive films in terms of the data, but there is a potential data gold mine, which for reasons I just do not understand, the social media companies are just not doing anything with.
No, I think you make a good point on interactive videos and social media, and that's largely because a lot of the tracking processes and sort of the probabilistic logic of sort of user tracing and sort of content generation in terms of user action on social media that's interactive behind the scenes in the sense that there are a bunch of AI algorithms tracking and redirecting clicks and whatever the mouse cursor kind of hovers over. But they don't allow interactive videos you can click on. And so, in terms of AI and interactive video, so you're doing both at the moment, and you're also working on a set of videos for Google DeepMind. And so, while not a social media company per se, they are very, very prominent in this space. And so, if you don't mind, I would love to hear a little bit more about sort of your process of designing and directing.
The point about that workshop is we're talking about the ethics and politics of AI. And you can come to that workshop and you can hate AI, and that's fine. a lot of our participants do hate AI. And I would say increasingly young participants, especially young people who are connected with or hoping to be connected with the film industry, whatever exactly that means in 2026, are becoming increasingly angry about AI, and for good reason. AI is a milestone in human history. Its consequences are impossible to calculate. At the moment, the decisions about AI and what it should be, what it should do, are being made by a tiny number of people, almost a handful of people, mostly in Silicon Valley, though one of them is in London quite a lot. But it's, a completely undemocratic situation, and people are right to be scared and angry about the situation. But what I found with from the sessions with AI Basics is that most people, it's often portrayed as, are you scared about AI or are you excited about AI? I found that almost everyone is both scared and excited. A few people are only scared and a few people are only excited. Most people are both. It's not an either or thing. And that certainly includes me, because most people think, well, there's potentially this huge downside. On the other hand, potentially there's a big upside. And almost everyone agrees in the AI basic sessions it's not going to go away. This is part of our life now. We weren't expecting it necessarily, but it's here. And even if we're not interested in it, it's interested in us, and it is going to change our lives and our kids' lives and the lives of everyone we know. Okay, so moving on to AI generated video. As a filmmaker, I have had a number of projects that I've been trying to make for many years, which were just too expensive, too difficult. It is surprisingly difficult getting funding for films which teach people how to save other people's lives. You would have thought, I remember way back in about 2003 when I started attempting to do these things, that everyone would want to fund such a film. But no, almost no one wants to fund such a film. Using traditional methods to film something like CPR is pretty straightforward, but getting funding for that is still a big challenge. But there is a whole bunch of other life-saving emergencies, which I call the deadly dozen, which is 12 other emergencies where, just as with CPR, a layperson with no real medical experience or training can save lives with these 12 emergencies, provided they just have a little bit of training, which we can give them with an interactive film. So one of these films that I most wanted to do was fire safety. If you're trapped in a fire, what do you do? How do you get out? What should you be doing? And of course, thinking about that naturally makes people prepare better. But it was always going to be impossible to make, because shooting people close to fire is really, really dangerous. And to do it right, it's very expensive. However, with the advent of AI generated video, it's become really quite easy to make really good looking videos of fire and put people right next to that fire because they're AI generated. And so I got the opportunity to do a bit of work with Google DeepMind. They wanted to do an experiment related to some interesting new projects that they've got. So I managed to persuade them that we should do an interactive film about fire safety. And I'm still working on that. It's called Flashover. I hope it will be coming out soon. But there we've been able to use AI generated video to do something which I've been trying to make for 10 years, but never could because it was just far too expensive, far too difficult. It was never going to happen, basically, in a sort of shot in a traditional way. But now we've been able to do it with AI generated video. And what I would say is it's not just another bit of entertainment. The vast majority of AI generated video is just entertainment. And you might say, we've already got enough entertainment. Why do we need yet more entertainment? And I would agree with that. But I would say that there are some use cases where AI generated video can do something which would be basically impossible to do otherwise. and where they have a utility, social utility, beyond mere entertainment. And I would say Flashover will be exactly that. Even before it's been released, I know 3 people who have checked their smoke alarms after watching some of the footage from Flashover, and one person who changed her order for a carpet from a nylon carpet to a wool carpet because I made her, like, the film made her paranoid about fire safety. She's visiting the Titanic. These are absolutely charming, very educational, impossible to shoot traditionally. The budget you would need for the Roman Empire one would be like the budget of Gladiator. But obviously, Gladiator only gets made because people want to follow Russell Crowe and his kind of emotional battle to do X, Y, and Z. So I think that's another example where I think we're going to get some charming examples of AI generated video that do a great job. And I stand right behind those. I'm sure there is already a raging, furious debate about AI generated video. AI is clearly already a new culture war, and the war is just going to intensify, hopefully verbally rather than physically, but physically as well. And we're seeing that in attacks on Uber cars, not Uber cars, beg your pardon, Waymo cars, spray painting Waymo cars with passengers inside them and this sort of thing. I don't want to get drawn into that. What I would say is that as far as my activity goes, I think it is ethically defensible, and I think there is definitely ethically defensible AI generated video out there. Yeah, but I think one facet of the culture war is about the AI culture war is that we're going to get indie culture. A lot of indie culture is going to become AI free. So if you're looking for an idea for a new indie film festival, my recommendation is create an AI free film festival, because people will come flocking to that. Because increasingly, I think many people right across the age range want culture to be something which is AI free. A little bit of digital as a tool, that's okay. But they don't want generative AI acting as a creator in any substantial way. They want culture to be something which is human made. I'm sure that there will be large pockets of culture in the future which remain like that, while the AI generated culture and the AI generated video just kind of blasts through the mainstream just because of the economies of scale.
I think that's fair. And so the future of AI and its impact on civilization, especially entertainment, and given the Warner Brothers Paramount merger, some of the concerns about how it's going to affect movie production and accessible competition within the entertainment industry, which is already shrinking significantly because of AI, are very valid. And so, jumping back to what you mentioned about the scenes with fire and sort of filming that with AI instead of an actual set, either due to both safety and budgetary constraints, is actually very important because, a lot of people used to talk about how you could watch a video and you'd look at some of the fire, you look at a car explosion and be like, oh, that's CGI. And so now with the AI generated video content, it's no longer CGI. It's all generated as one, and so it's not generated as an overlay to augment the existing video, which has streamlined a lot of effects ranging from fire to water to smoke. With that being said, like, can you touch on some of the discrepancies between human generated content and then AI generated content, AI content generated by humans, and the boundaries of how you see that affecting both corporate and indie film development, as well as a lot of the awards categories, because there are now categories for use of AI in film, and even the Oscars are talking about the potential for, like best AI actor, etc.
Interesting. Yes, I am definitely not trying to evangelize AI. I am trying to evangelize the importance of AI watershed in human history, and as a new technology whose impact on everyday life is currently unknown, but will be vast. And Demis Hassabis, for example, smart guy, charming guy, brilliant guy, reckons that it'll be 10 times the impact of the Industrial Revolution, but 10 times faster. Well, far be it from me to contradict Demis Hassabis. Now, with the Industrial Revolution, creatively, there were two, to simplify massively, you could say there were two basic responses. On the one hand, some people just went with it, and so factories were created and creators went, made products that used these new factories. And so you got carpets and dresses and buildings and motor cars and all sorts of products which were entirely industrial, which had been designed to take advantage of these new industrial processes. But at the same time, and more in the realm of sort of high art and high culture, you had a lot of artists rejecting the Industrial Revolution. So in the UK, we had the Pre-Raphaelite movement. So this was like a Victorian movement of artists and who were all about rejecting a sort of an industrial way of life, trying to get back to a pre-industrial way of life, which was about respecting nature, about respecting human relationships, and sort of, being closer to nature and to each other. They did a lot of handcrafted work. They did sort of paintings, which maybe haven't aged well, but, paintings of, set in the Middle Ages of beautiful maidens and so on, and sort of knights, where, the subject matter hasn't aged well, but the craftspersonship was absolutely phenomenal. And that was what it was all about. It was all about this handcraft. We have a question. Do you think there should be a ban on films which are entirely written by AI? Not a ban on scriptwriters using AI tools, but a ban on films written by AI. And it's not unanimous. But I would say in every session, there is a group who say strongly, yes, there should be a ban on that. Especially young people, anything to do with the film industry, 100% there should be a ban on it. But but right across the age range, there are people who think there should be a ban on it. They think that, rather like the Pre-Raphaelites, culture should be something which is human-based, human-centered, and of course, there's an economic side to that as well. There are all sorts of people, especially in the great city of Los Angeles, but also in the in the humble village of London, who make a living from the film industry. And, they don't want to suddenly be thrown out of work by a bunch of algorithms. So it's not just aesthetic, but, for people outside the film industry, they also feel that that's the way they want it to be. But meanwhile, at the same time, the economics of creating content with AI are very difficult to fight. The quality is not there yet, but the improvement is exponential. And one thing I would say generally is that anytime someone says AI can't, I have this little thing go off in my head, which is, well, maybe it can't now, but what about 1 year from now? What about 5 years from now? What about 10 years from now? Will it still not be able to do that? Because usually when people say AI can't, most of the time they're going on something which is already 6 months out of date or a year out of date. But because they're not really kind of keeping up to speed with AI and how it progresses, they don't realize how fast it's changed. So AI video is just changing phenomenally quickly. A video made with Dance 2.0, which is the new, one to beat. And it's just unbelievable what you can do now compared with what you could do a month ago. And that's routinely the case. Okay, the quality's not there now, but it will be in 5 years. I mean, I think in 5 years, it's just getting so much better so fast. Don't see how it's going to be possible to beat it in 5 years, just in terms of the output. Obviously that's a forward-looking guess, but that is my guess given the rate of progress at the moment. But obviously already when it comes to culture, the identity of the artist is a big factor, right? There is, all sorts of books and plays and films where the fact that the creator was a woman, or there, we had a black creator, or the creator had a certain heritage. That's a fundamental part of watching the film and appreciating the film. So this AI culture war is like a development of that. That there are going to be a whole range of films where fundamental is that the creators are all human. And that's why they have a right to talk about this human story. And coming to awards, I must say I was surprised that the Oscars were so open to the idea of accepting AI influence. And I think that may change back, because what I've seen over the last 3 years is that 3 years ago, there wasn't really much opposition to AI. No one really, it wasn't really a thing. But I've seen the opposition go stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. And absolutely in the film industry, the opposition is ramping up in terms of opposition. And obviously, I have no connection with anyone in the Academy. My hunch is that the Academy might start to walk back some of these concessions they've been making to AI. And I would be astonished if they bring in a category for Best AI Actor, because so many of their members are physical human actors, and you better believe they do not want there to be an award for Best AI Actor. And yeah, so I think even the acceptance that we've had so far, I wouldn't be surprised if it goes away. And also if you think of a film like The Brutalist, where there was a whole controversy about this thing, it had used AI to improve the Hungarian accents of some of the talent. Maybe it would have been more supported. Maybe it would have done better because it wasn't tarnished with its slight use of AI. And I think certainly if I was guiding an Oscars sort of awards strategy push, I would be saying no AI. It's going to be completely AI free. So many people in the film industry hate AI. This is going to be a clean film, and I think more and more, there's any number of AI free logos coming out. They've got AI free logos for books and for all sorts of things. I think increasingly at the start of films, we're going to see a big. I think we're going to hear applause and cheering when that logo appears in the cinema. So yeah, but at the same time, for mainstream kit consumption material, AI is just going to power forward because it's so much easier to make the material. The quality is getting so much better. If you want an amazingly pretty man or an amazingly pretty woman, you don't have to talk to their agent. You just make the one that you have in your mind. And as you said, sure, as you shared, all the effects and so on are so much more straightforward and getting so much better. Yeah. So I think we're going to have this sort of split culture. So if one is a filmmaker, it's a question of thinking, well, which culture do I want to be a part of?
That is a very, very, very intense, delicate, and multifaceted question. So yeah, the between any academy and entertainment and all of the unions, including their ongoing negotiations, I think that yeah, there's a lot of pushback, and I agree that a lot of that does boil down to the focus of individuality and sort of what makes people, unique within the entertainment industry, which is a lot of what it thrives on. And for instance, like with the award ceremonies, they have the NAACP Image Award, and then they have everything from Webbys, Tellys, to traditional EGOTs, etc. And within that, there's a whole slew of awards, and it's almost like if there's an individual tribute that people value, there's an award ceremony for that. It doesn't have to be Cannes. And so yeah, it has, and it already will continue to sort of change the dynamics for entertainment for better or worse. I can understand, I can be compassionate to a lot of the concerns I think that entertainers have, because I know a lot of people who are affected by it. At the same time, I think it's very important for a lot of people in almost any industry to try and embrace it to a certain extent, at least tools or whatever, because I don't think it's here to stay, and that sums up the situation, and that it's in terms of voiceover and dubbing for AI. I think there it's being streamlined for indie productions and companies and startups like 11 Labs, but I think the I can't say for sure how it's going to impact, the development in traditional entertainment and the award ceremonies. I know that there are a lot of large scale productions that are using AI, in place of green screens or essentially to augment some of that. And so they may have human actors performing, but then it's just the special effects, the pyrotechnics, all AI. And so yeah, it's going to be interesting and I think somewhat frightening for a lot of people to see kind of how it plays out. And
Great questions. I think I think we've got everything. Yes.
awesome. All right. Thanks again for taking the time.
Likewise. Thanks very much. Okay. Take care. See you soon.
Anytime.